$68. That was the price of a barrel of oil just weeks ago. Today, it is $113, a 60% jump in under a month. Let that sink in. The last time oil moved this fast, Nixon was in the White House. Americans were lining up around the block just to fill their gas tanks, and the economy did not truly heal for years. But here is what makes 2026 fundamentally different from 1973, and fundamentally more dangerous. In 1973, the oil was still there. OPEC chose not to sell it, but the wells were intact, the refineries were standing, the tankers were floating. Today, the infrastructure itself is burning. The Strait of Hormuz is choked, Ras Laffan is offline, and missiles are hitting real energy infrastructure.
Even if the war stops tomorrow, the damage that has already been done cannot be undone.
That is what we are breaking down today. This is hidden economy. So let us start with the thing you can feel without looking at a single chart, because this is not some abstract macro story. This is a slow punch to your wallet every week.
You grab the gas pump, you swipe your card, and the number that used to be annoying is now painful, because oil moving from the high 60s to above 110 does not stay on Wall Street screens. It translates into real dollars every time you fill up.
Before this war flared, national average gas prices sat in the low $3 range, and it was still possible in some parts of the Midwest to find a two-handle on the sign if you drove a bit. Now, with crude in the triple digits and shipping routes under threat, average prices are grinding higher. Coastal states are seeing much steeper jumps, and every extra 20 or 30 bucks at the pump is coming out of something you meant to do this month, whether that is your kids' activities, your savings, or just breathing room. And that is just gasoline. The real shock sits in diesel, because diesel is how everything you touch gets to you, and that is where this war is quietly jamming a knife into the ribs of the economy. Every pallet at Costco, every box in an Amazon warehouse, every beam of lumber and roll of roofing material moves by truck at some point. And those trucks do not care about your budget. They care about diesel. When diesel prices spike hard, trucking companies push fuel surcharges onto shippers. Shippers pass that on to stores, and stores fold it into the price on the shelf. So by the time you see it, the war in the Gulf is hiding in the price tag of orange juice, diapers, and dog food. It does not feel like Iran or Ras Laffan or Hormuz when you scan that barcode. It just feels like another week where the receipt at the grocery store is bigger than you remember. And that is exactly how energy shocks sneak into your life. To understand why this one is so dangerous, you have to see the physical side, not just the price. In the 1970s, the tap was turned off on purpose, but the pipes, tanks, and ports were still there, waiting for someone to say on again. In 2026, that is not the story. This war is not just about cutting supply, it is about damaging the machinery that moves that supply. And that is a much scarier problem, because you cannot negotiate with ruined concrete and twisted steel. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman, is the main artery for oil and gas leaving the Gulf, handling around a fifth of the world's traded oil and a big slice of global LNG, and now it is full of naval ships, drones, and insurance premiums that look like phone numbers. Ras Laffan in Qatar is the other critical node, the kind of place most people never thought about until it went dark. It is not just another plant, it's the largest LNG export hub on the planet, a complex that before the shooting started handled close to a fifth of global LNG flows and fed power plants from Tokyo to Berlin. Now it is a symbol of what happens when missiles meet modern energy infrastructure. Damage to liquefaction trains, fires in storage and processing areas, and a web of force majeure notices ripping through long-term contracts mean that gas which was supposed to be locked in for years simply is not arriving. You do not see Ras Laffan on your commute, but you see what it does in your power bill months later when utilities pay more for replacement gas and slide that cost into your rate. When you block Hormuz and cripple Ras Laffan at the same time, you are not just cutting one supply line, you are twisting two of the most important valves the global economy has. And what spills out is not just higher prices, but real instability. Asian buyers that counted on Qatari LNG suddenly have to scramble in the spot market, bidding against each other and against Europeans who still remember the pain of losing Russian gas in 2022. Ship owners reroute vessels around dangerous zones, which takes more time, burns more fuel, and costs more money. And those costs sit in the background of everything from plastics to steel. Oil traders who live off reading fear build war risk premiums into every barrel. And once those premiums settle in, they do not disappear just because one headline sounds a little less bad this week.
Now layer that onto households. You are in your 40s, you have a mortgage, maybe 2 kids, a car payment or 2, and a retirement account that you hope will mean you are not stocking shelves at 70.
Your gas bill is up, your grocery bill is creeping higher, your power bill is stickier, and your landlord or your bank is not lowering your housing costs just because fuel went crazy.
In a normal recession, prices might cool off as demand falls, but in an energy shock like this, the thing that is hurting you is also the thing that keeps prices stubborn, and that is where the word stagflation starts to show up again on screens.
Stagflation is one of those economic terms that sounds academic until you live it. It means growth is weak or negative, jobs get harder to find, but prices keep rising anyway.
The toolkit that central banks used in 2008 and even in 2020 was built for problems where demand collapsed and inflation was too low, not too high. But right now, the Federal Reserve is looking at a very different picture. Rates are already elevated compared to the last decade. Inflation never fully went back to the old 2% target, and now this war is pouring fresh gasoline on energy and food prices at the worst possible time. If the Fed cuts rates to rescue growth, it risks feeding the very inflation that is crushing your budget. And if it keeps rates high or even nudges them up to fight inflation, it risks choking off jobs and pushing the economy into recession. It is a lose-lose position, and you are the one in the middle of that tug of war. Companies respond to uncertainty by freezing hiring, delaying investment, and hoarding cash, which slows the economy, while consumers respond by cutting discretionary spending, which can trigger the very downturn everyone fears. But your rent, your gas, your groceries, and your insurance premiums do not politely wait for the macro picture to clear. They keep rolling through the door. And then there is the government side of the ledger. War is not free, and the bill does not arrive in some abstract future. It arrives now. Flying sorties, maintaining carriers, launching precision weapons, funding intelligence and cyber operations, and supporting allies all generate a burn rate that can easily hit billions a day when a conflict is this intense. At the same time, tax revenues become less reliable if the economy slows, and pressure grows for more spending on relief, subsidies, or strategic stockpile releases to soften the blow on consumers. That mix means more borrowing, higher deficits, and a future where interest payments on the debt take up a bigger share of the budget, squeezing out things that actually touch your life, from roads and schools to health services. If all of this sounds familiar in a bad way, it is because we have seen fragments of it before. The oil embargo in the 1970s, the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s, the dot-com bust in the early 2000s, the housing crash in 2008, the energy shock from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, each of those carved a scar in the memory of a generation. What is different about 2026 is the way several of those themes stack on top of each other at once. You have an energy supply shock that is not just political, but physical. You have inflation that was already above target. You have a central bank boxed in. You have debt levels that are much higher than in the 1970s. And you have a global supply chain that is far more integrated, which means a hit in one region ripples everywhere.
Think about something as simple as a pickup truck. The frame might be welded in the US, but the electronics inside, the chips that control everything from fuel injection to braking, depend on factories in Asia that rely on cheap, stable power and steady LNG shipments.
When those shipments are disrupted and electricity gets more expensive and less reliable, those factories delay output or raise prices, and suddenly the truck that was already unaffordable for many becomes a luxury item for even more. That is how a missile hitting Ras Laffan translates into fewer new vehicles on dealer lots in Ohio and higher prices for the ones that are left. Or think about food. Fertilizer is energy in solid form, and when gas prices spike, fertilizer production becomes less profitable, especially in places that import gas. Farmers face higher costs for the same acreage, and some cut back on application, which can lower yields. Lower yields in a world that is already dealing with climate shocks, water stress, and growing populations means tighter supply. And tighter supply meets steady or rising demand with higher prices. You might not notice it overnight, but over months and seasons, it shows up in how much you pay for basics like bread, eggs, and meat. There is also a psychological side that charts cannot capture. When headlines are full of war, nuclear sites under threat, tankers on fire, and central banks sounding worried, people feel less safe about the future. For someone in their 40s who has already lived through at least 2 big crises, that can trigger a kind of economic PTSD, where your first reaction is to pull back, save more if you can, delay big purchases, and maybe even rethink your job or business plans. Businesses pick up on that mood too, and it becomes a feedback loop, where fear of slowdown helps create the slowdown. All of this sounds dark, and it is, but there is a reason to go through it in detail. Every time the global energy system has broken in the past, it has forced change. The 1970s made fuel efficiency and strategic reserves part of the policy toolkit. The early 2000s pushed investment into new extraction technologies like shale. The Russia-Ukraine shock accelerated Europe's shift to renewables and LNG diversification. This war in 2026 is already sending a loud message about how dangerous it is to concentrate so much of the world's energy through a single strait and a handful of massive complexes. The question is not whether the system will adapt. It will. The question is how much damage happens in the transition and who pays for that damage. If you are in your 40s in America right now, odds are you will be the one paying through higher prices, slower wage growth, more volatile investments, and a tax system that needs more from you to service higher debts. Your kids may grow up in a world where the energy mix is cleaner, more diversified, and less hostage to any one region. But the bridge to that world is built out of the crisis we're talking about today. So where does that leave you? It means you cannot control the war, the missiles, or the Strait of Hormuz, but you can control how exposed you are to the kind of shock we are walking through. That might mean rethinking how much of your budget is tied up in car commuting, how much debt you carry at variable rates, how much of your portfolio is riding on sectors that are very sensitive to energy costs, and how much emergency cushion you have if your job gets caught in the downdraft. It also means paying attention to policy debates in a way that is not just tribal, because whether we invest in infrastructure, in diversification, in efficiency, is not an abstract fight. It is about how much pain you'll feel the next time the tap catches fire instead of just being turned off. $68 to $113 is not just a story about oil. It is a story about how fragile our systems still are and how expensive it is when we ignore that fragility until something breaks. The 1970s taught that lesson the hard way. If we do not learn it now in this war, your generation may be the one that gets a second dose.
If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what is really at stake when you see that oil price headline, hit subscribe, because we are going to keep following this week by week, from the wells and tankers all the way to your wallet.